to me.
There's a ton of election year conversions. I mean, you see right now Governor Polis presenting a $100 million public safety package. He's saying things like, look, we're going to put money into resources for mental health. That's a good thing. We're going to prevent domestic violence. That's a good thing. But what he's really doing is he's taking some buzzwords that sound great, and he's putting this money into short-term grant-funded programs. These are not durable solutions that are actually going to have long-term effects to drive down crime rates. It's election year window dressing. And on this topic of fentanyl, he's saying, oh yeah, I need the legislature to send me a bill that's going to change these possession weight amounts and hold dealers more accountable. After 2 years ago, he signed this bill into effect.
Recently in Commerce City, 5 people died in an apartment building, and it looks like fentanyl, which is I don't really even know. So I went to my drug expert, Jon Kellner, who's done a lifetime of illicit drugs to find out. John's the DA for the 18th District. Talk to me a little bit about fentanyl, because this I've heard about for years, but it is becoming epidemic right now. What is fentanyl?
Well, it absolutely is becoming epidemic. And to kind of set the stage, number one, not a personal experience, but a lifetime of prosecution and law enforcement. So we'll talk about it from that perspective.
I think a guy like you in the Marines, Reserves,
So here's what fentanyl is. It is a synthetic opioid, and that means it's cooked up in a lab. Oftentimes it's produced in China, shipped to Mexico, where it is, again, in clandestine labs, split up and pill pressed into something that looks like an oxycodone pill, for instance, smuggled across the border into the United States, and then ultimately into Colorado. But the danger of fentanyl here, and the thing to understand about it, because it's a synthetic opioid, and it's really just like a white powder, we're talking about something that can be smuggled in very small amounts, and it is incredibly potent. It's probably 50 times more potent than heroin.
So my understanding was, particularly as heroin was getting harder and harder to find, people would cut heroin with this thing that would give them this extra buzz. And it wasn't as much the heroin that did the damage, although that's damaging enough. It was this fentanyl that would give them a super high whatever buzz that they get from it, but it kills you.
Yeah.
And now it's mixed in all sorts of illicit drugs because, as you said, the more potent, the smaller it is, the easier to get in. Are these made in real labs, or is this meth labs a la Breaking Bad, or in China are there actually professional labs creating this?
Yeah, so it's professional labs creating it.
Is there a medical use at all for fentanyl?
Absolutely, there's a medical use for fentanyl, and it's administered in micrograms, so smaller than milligrams, just the tiniest amount. So there are actual uses for this drug. Now, I don't believe the supply chain that's ending up in Mexico is originating from, let's say a legitimate lab who's supplying it to, a regulated hospital. But on the potency side of things, what I want anybody who watches this to understand is that just one pill can kill, and most people don't know what's inside these pills. So if you think about a gram, let's say like a NutraSweet packet that you put in your coffee in the morning, that's a gram of that sweetener. So really just 2 micrograms. I mean, I'm talking about like little grains of that is enough to kill. So in Colorado in 2019, the governor signed a law into effect that actually defelonized, many respects, fentanyl and the possession of fentanyl to 4 grams is now a misdemeanor. 4 grams is enough to kill thousands of people.
Hang on, let me see if I got this right. Because I remember this bill there's a lot of sentencing reform that probably needs to happen on small doses of marijuana, all sorts of things as the laws are changing. But 4 grams of fentanyl is a ton of fentanyl. What was it? What was the limit beforehand? Was it that over 4 is a felony, under 4 is a misdemeanor? Help me out. I'm not in your business.
That's right. So right now, if you think about the penalties for fentanyl distribution, if you go up to the highest level of a felony, it's a DF1, so drug felony level 1. You have to have over 225 grams of fentanyl. So we're talking about tens of thousands of pills for that to be a highest level felony. The bill in 2019, what it did was it said, look, if you possess less than 4 grams, we're going to consider that a user amount. And to your point, I mean, I think it's well-intentioned, the idea to say, look, we do not want to lock up addicts and users. We want to make sure they're getting treatment. We don't want them in the system over and over and over again, right? We want them to live law-abiding lives. But what this bill did was it said 4 grams or less is a misdemeanor user amount. Now, that could be, in reality, up to maybe 100 pills. So, a dealer is going to carry around less than 4 grams, and if they get contacted by somebody at Union Station, a police officer saying, hey, what are you doing with that? And they've got this amount. It's my personal use.
And it's a misdemeanor.
And it's misdemeanor. You're likely to get a ticket.
What was the law before Polis signed this into?
That was a drug felony level 4.
Okay.
And what I liked about the old law that made sense was we had a thing called a wobbler. Now we're getting deep into the weeds here, but it was charged as a felony. And if you completed the treatment, hey, guess what? It became a misdemeanor. Or we would just dismiss that case entirely if you got your life back on track for that low level.
So USDA had more flexibility. So this guy, well, you've been arrested for it over and over and over and over, and we've got these other guys you're selling it, so obviously you're just carrying this amount. But we could get you here. If you're a user, we can drop the charges if you prove this stuff. And that's really taken away a lot of power from DAs around the state because of this.
Well, power from courts as well, and even defense attorneys who are trying to get their addict clients some help. I mean, really, if you think about it, the system that existed had carrots and sticks involved with it, right? Hey, look, if you do not complete this, you might have a conviction that could cause you some trouble in life. If you don't complete this, you might end up going to jail, right? And on the other side, it was, but if you accept this help, and that's hard for somebody who's addicted to do at times, right? They've got to want to do it. They've got to sometimes, feel the compulsion to actually get it done, right? That was an option before. And in many ways, that's gone.
All right, so I know it's an election year. I know that our governor is changing a few things. I love that he's reducing the taxes he himself put in until after he's reelected. I mean, we're going to put a hold on your gas tax increase for 1 year. And then after I'm reelected, I'll put it back. Is there any of that kind of action going on right now?
Oh,
explain it to me.
There's a ton of election year conversions. I mean, you see right now Governor Polis presenting a $100 million public safety package. He's saying things like, look, we're going to put money into resources for mental health. That's a good thing. We're going to prevent domestic violence. That's a good thing. But what he's really doing is he's taking some buzzwords that sound great, and he's putting this money into short-term grant-funded programs. These are not durable solutions that are actually going to have long-term effects to drive down crime rates. It's election year window dressing. And on this topic of fentanyl, he's saying, oh yeah, I need the legislature to send me a bill that's going to change these possession weight amounts and hold dealers more accountable. After 2 years ago, he signed this bill into effect.
Let me see if I'm following you here. So he signed this bill into effect, which is having some bad outcomes. And so now being tough on crime and realizing that safety is a huge issue right now, and I've never seen it. I've lived here all my life. Now he's saying we need to change it to something better, as if he didn't have something to do with what it is now. Has he ever said, I was wrong?
I haven't heard him say I was wrong yet, and I will wait with bated breath for that to happen. Did you see that?
By the way, that happens. You pass things with the best of intent, and bad things happen. And so, great, but he should then say, I shouldn't have signed that bill. Let's fix my mistake.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And, just this last weekend, I read this piece by Mayor Suthers and Mayor Hancock saying, hey, look, Governor, legislature, this was a bad idea. Just acknowledge it was bad and let's fix it, but do it with the input of mayors and law enforcement professionals. Because back in 2019, when they were debating this bill, of course, DAs, law enforcement were showing up at the Capitol saying, do not do this. This is going to have a negative effect on Colorado. But it happened anyway. They passed it anyway.
Well, I'll get on my high horse on this one. I've been in politics for 3 decades. I have never seen such hubris as I have seen for the last few years under this regime. I have never seen lawmakers be so belligerent in how they pass what they do without stakeholder process. I've never seen anything like it. And I mean, if you're a layman, you don't know this stuff, but watching it, I've just never seen any group of legislators be this heavy-handed and not bring in opposing viewpoints to try to find out some of these unintended consequences.
Well, that's one of the downsides of one-party rule, right? You don't have to compromise. It's sort of my way or the highway. And look, I will say there are times when it feels that way for me, testifying at the Capitol about public safety bills or bills that impact the criminal justice system. I'm wondering, why not engage us earlier, right?
Well, let me tell you, if you're showing up at the testifying level, that is window dressing. Before you go and testify, because by the time you testify, the votes are in. It is kabuki theater. You do what you can, but no, beforehand, when the bill sponsor is looking at this and brings in stakeholders to find out what's good and bad about their idea, and you guys aren't involved. You guys are nowhere to be found, and now we're in the middle of a crime epidemic. All right, so talk to me again about fentanyl. You've been doing this for a long time. How has this grown from your point of view as a local prosecutor? Go back 10 years.
Yeah.
How is this just media or is this just hype?
This is real, and this is a real epidemic. So really a lot of this began with the opioid epidemic. We're talking about oxy pills being readily available and people dying from that or becoming horribly addicted to it. And once those pills really dried up, especially as doctors became wiser to the idea that, hey, these things are highly addictive despite what they were marketed as, we're going to start pulling back on prescribing these to everybody. People ended up going towards heroin, and now it's more towards fentanyl because they're looking for that fix. Now, go back to 2016 here. My office, we had prosecuted a person who had repeatedly distributed and dealt drugs that caused the death of the users. And this dealer knew that kids were dying from these drugs. We prosecuted her very aggressively in a somewhat unique fact pattern for murder. She ended up pleading guilty to second-degree murder, was sentenced to decades in prison, appropriately so. We went to the legislature and we said, you know what? We do not have the tools in our arsenal to hold dealers accountable when they're peddling this poison that's causing death. So 2016, we put forward through some legislators a bill that said, you know what? Let's increase the penalties for dealers who distribute drugs, sell drugs, and then people die. It's not called murder. It's drug distribution resulting in death. Now, as you can imagine, that bill died a little death of its own in 2016. It did not make it out of a committee. And here I am listening in December of 2021, our current Attorney General say, hey, you know what? I'm starting to hear about fentanyl. You know what we should do? We should have a drug distribution resulting in death sentence enhancer for the dealers. And you hear that same sort of rhetoric coming out of Polis. That's what concerns me right now is the idea that, look, I'm glad people are coming around to positions we've held for a long time. That's a good thing. But the idea that it's really just election year conversions.
Yeah, that if I love the election year that the crime wave we've had, we're going to address now. Well, the crime wave you guys let happen, the streets of Denver, which have become encampments and killing fields, and it is ugly. As a kid who grew up here, seeing what's happened, people don't feel safe because people aren't safe. All right, people want to get in touch with you, learn more about this. Where do they go?
Well, so as District Attorney for the 18th Judicial District, we run a website, da18.org. We've got information about what we're doing. We've got information about a big bust of fentanyl that we had, over 110,000 pills that we seized, I think some 20 plus.
110,000.
Yeah. That's the level of drugs coming across our border.
That?
Oh my gosh, it depends. You could sell a pill for $20 to $30. It could go down to $6. It really depends on what the market's doing that day. So it's a lot. And this is cartel-based, allegations. These are people that are going through the system right now, all presumed innocent, But as part of this, what people need to understand, it's not just the deadly drugs. In that particular case, we seized over 20 firearms from, again, what appears to be a cartel-based operation. So they're not only protecting their illicit drugs with guns, but they're potentially using them in their own violence against each other.
Jon, keep up the fight. Thanks
you.
for being here.
I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.